Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our event, In Conversation, Belonging and What's Next for Constitutional Recognition. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge the Bidjigal people whose land this event is being held on today, and acknowledge the country of those who are joining us online. Tonight's event, hosted by the Uluru Dialogue and Pro-Vice Chancellor Society UNSW, is part of UNSW's Diversity Fest. Diversity Fest platforms conversations that matter, and we are delighted to be part of the program they've put together. Tonight's discussion is an important and timely discussion on the idea of belonging, what's next for constitutional recognition, and the continued relevance of the Uluru Statement from the Heart. UNSW has been a strong supporter of the Uluru Statement, in particular constitutional recognition of First Nations peoples, through having a say on the matters that affect us. It is at the heart of UNSW's strategy, Progress for All. Before I introduce the other speakers, I'd like to briefly introduce myself. My name is Bridie Zors. I'm a proud Wiradjuri woman from Central West New South Wales, an Uluru Youth Dialogue Ambassador and Project Officer for the Pro-Vice Chancellor Society UNSW. I'll also be your moderator this evening. I'm joined by two incredible speakers, Alira Davis, Cobble Cobble woman and Youth Manager and Co-Chair of the Uluru Youth Dialogue, and Bridget Tharma, Wiradjuri woman, legal researcher to the Pro-Vice Chancellor Society, and Co-Chair of the Uluru Youth Dialogue. The Uluru Youth Dialogue sits under the leadership of the Uluru Dialogue, co-chaired by Professor Megan Davis and Arnie Pat Anderson. The Uluru Dialogue represents the cultural authority of the Uluru Statement from the Heart. We were established following the issuing of the statement in 2017 to continue the work towards the reforms called for by the statement, a constitutional voice and Makarrata. The Uluru Dialogue ran the Indigenous-led campaign in support of the Voice referendum and community education on the Voice and Uluru Statement from the Heart. We are now the group leading post-referendum work and analysis. I'd also like to acknowledge Professor Davis, who's in the audience this evening, and congratulate her. Yesterday, Professor Davis attended her investiture ceremony where she was appointed a Companion of the Order of Australia, the nation's highest civilian honour. So congratulations, Prof. So I'd just like to begin by asking a question about some reflections. As we approach the second anniversary of the Voice referendum, I thought we could reflect on the theme of Diversity Festival, Conversations That Matter. Alira, I'll start with you. Why is this conversation about what's next for constitutional recognition so important?
Yeah, thank you, Bridie, and thank you all for being here. It's a delight and privilege to be talking about what we're doing moving forward, but who we are as the Uluru Youth Dialogue as well. But first also I'd like to acknowledge country and acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land that we are all meeting on today. I pay my respects to elders past and present and acknowledge that this was and always will be Aboriginal land. So yeah, a bit of reflection. We're millennials right now, so we're using our phones for our notes. So if I'm looking down at my phone, no, I'm not looking at TikToks. I'm actually just reading some notes. But yeah, I think, this is an important conversation. I think after post-referendum and the referendum result outcome, people kind of tend to forget about the result and, what we had been through as a nation and where we need to go to. So I think it's super important, it's super significant for our country, not just for our people, but for non-Indigenous people, and really talking about the outcomes and where we need to go to from here. So yeah, I think working on, and Prof can also acclaim to this, working on constitutional recognition for about 15 years. Like, it's not just a new conversation. And also I can see Sean Brennan in the audience as well. So hi, Sean, who's one of the constitutional lawyers who was a part of all the regional dialogues as well. So yeah, I think we have about 15 years in the making, 8 processes, 11 reports, and still no change. So we're very much still in the status quo, and we really need to make change. And B always says this, we want to see a change in our lifetime, and that's what we're here for. We're here to talk about, some of the things that we went through, but also the process moving forward.
Bridget, did you want to touch on that question, maybe in relation to the work we're doing now, post-referendum?
Yeah, I think similar to what Alira said, post-referendum, it felt like there wasn't a conversation and that we haven't had an opportunity as a country to discuss what happened, which is very different to other referendums that have happened in this country, for example, the Republic referendum. So I feel really privileged to be part of the group of Uluru Dialogue team that continue this work moving forward, because this issue isn't going away. Our constitution remains silent on the positive recognition of First Nations people in this country, and all three of us were really privileged to be able to take a delegation this year to Geneva to attend the United Nations expert mechanism on the rights of Indigenous people. And what we heard time and time again was how constitutional recognition can lead to the upholding of our rights and how important that is. And that's the one key message that I brought home. So that just reiterated for me that this movement continues, that this issue is not going away, and that it is the responsibility of all Australians to keep moving forward.
Yeah, I just want to take a step back because, we talk a lot about the movement and the fight for constitutional recognition, but I think it's important to touch on where that actually came from. Alira, you were part of the regional dialogue process that led to the issuing of the Uluru Statement from the Heart. Can you just explain briefly the process and the mandate of the statement and where this ask actually came from?
Yeah, so being a part of the regional dialogue process was an amazing opportunity. I think I was working in government at that time, and I was living in Canberra, Ngunnawal country. I got to attend the Brisbane Regional Dialogue with a lot of community elders, traditional owners, community organisations, and the process, and props to the Referendum Council as well for putting that structure together on ensuring that people were heard and people were seen. So there was a lot of frustration in the room, but there was also options of what constitutional recognition looked like to them, to mob. I think throughout the campaign, a lot of people thought it wasn't grassroots, community-led, but a lot of these, people who did sign or signatories to the Uluru Statement from the Heart came from communities, came from grassroots communities to have a say on the matters that affected them. And as a young, I think I was 20, I'm 29 now, so we call ourselves elder youth if we're over 30. We're going on, but I think experiencing that as a young person, as a young Aboriginal woman, it was very empowering. I think there was different, it was a different structure to give which options kind of looked good on the table, and constitutional recognition was the highest one voted. Not in majority of areas. Treaty was kind of up there, but it wasn't something that all states and territories wanted. For Queensland, we do have a very tedious and strenuous process with native title and Indigenous land use agreements. So treaty wasn't really high on the Queensland side. It was just interesting to see the difference in what people voted, but voice was definitely at the top. So the sequencing of voice, treaty, truth is super important to understand, which got lost in the referendum campaign, unfortunately. But that's what we're here for too. We're here to educate Australians, but also bring Australians along on the journey as well so they understand that.
Yeah, for sure. And obviously the Uluru Dialogue arose from the Regional Dialogues and Constitutional Convention process to lead the work and carry that forward. But Bridget, can I just get you to actually explain who we are as that Uluru Dialogue and what we actually do?
Yeah, so I think first of all, I'd just like to acknowledge, the leadership of Professor Megan Davis and Auntie Pat Anderson, who were a part of the Regional Dialogue process and the Referendum Council and led that work, who then took it upon themselves to continue to do the work post the issuing of the Uluru Statement to ensure, those things could be achieved. And we got to go to a referendum, which I think is a big achievement in itself. Whilst it didn't succeed, for me, that's only the beginning of this journey. And we talk about this all the time as young people, that we want to see another referendum in the next 10 years, and we will see us being constitutionally recognised in our lifetime. We're absolutely committed to that. And I was reflecting upon it today that, after the referendum, our youth were calling us and texting us saying, what do we do now? What's next? They, in a moment of real disappointment and devastation, it was our young people that were ready to go again, and that gives us a lot of drive moving forward. So back to our senior leadership, they're people that have, got this movement to where it is. And as you said before, we hold the cultural mandate of the Uluru Statement, and that comes from the First Nations men and women of the Regional Dialogue process, who were community representatives, people on the ground representing the views of their community. So we are, very much aligned with their views and making sure that we move forward with that mandate. And then the youth dialogue sits underneath that, and we are just as much committed to that mandate of the Uluru Statement. We did a lot of education throughout the referendum campaign, and we were out on the ground, all of us, when I say us, all members of the Uluru Dialogue were out on the ground every weekend, throughout the week, travelling to all places, regional, remote Australia, where it was so important for this education work to happen. And it would have been great to have more time to do the work that we did, but we did the best we could, and, those experiences in themselves were really valuable, where you'd walk into town halls and, at the end of a information session with community, have people standing up saying, thank you for taking the time to answer the questions and meet me where I was. I'll be now voting yes, and they're going to go spread the message. So I think moving forward, it's just telling of the work that we need to do with everyday Australians, and the Uluru Dialogue's committed to that.
Yeah, so you touched on this issue about not having enough time for our community education work. And this sort of feeds into the work we're doing now post-referendum to actually analyse the no, what went wrong, unpack why the referendum failed. Because as a nation, we've not actually yet had the opportunity to do this in depth together and discuss the reasons why it might have failed. So as a team, we've been doing a lot of research to analyse this, unpack it. And I was just wondering if either of you had any key takeaways from this research and the work we've been doing. I might start with you.
We've got a lot of key takeaways of why the referendum result was the way it was. We think media bias was a big one, where you'd see something positive about the referendum, there'd always be something so negative. There was a lot of disinformation about the referendum campaign and I guess the messaging, which all kind of ties into one as well. And it was unfortunate because the Uluru Statement from the heart wasn't about hate, it wasn't about division, it was about love, peace, it was about all of us coming together and all of us belonging. So it was unfortunate that message got lost within the process. However, we were still out there, still doing community briefings, still trying to, have our voices heard. And, we know that, all blackfellas aren't supposed to agree on the same thing. All non-Indigenous people aren't supposed to agree on the same thing. But we knew that over 83% of First Nations people did agree with a First Nations voice to Parliament, and did want this. And we saw this post-referendum as well within our research, is that, First Nations people voted for this and voted yes. But I might hand it to B for other takeaways as well.
Yeah, I think we touched on it a little bit before about what we're finding through our research is that people thought that the voice proposal actually came from government, that it was, and we saw that happen as soon as it became reported as Albo's voice, which immediately politicised the issue and everyday Australians actually thought it was his idea and didn't understand that it came from First Nations people, and it was the ask in the Uluru Statement from the heart. So that's why we're continuing to say to everybody, talk about the Uluru Statement, keep issuing the Uluru Statement, and let people know that this comes from First Nations people. And as A said, like, some of the highest voting booths in Australia were in remote Aboriginal communities. Like, it was so clear that our people wanted this. But I think the flip side of that is also that it became an Aboriginal issue and wasn't seen as an Australian issue that we all need to work on together to, resolve and, I guess, complete our constitution at some point. I think timing wasn't ideal. We know that, people weren't talking about the voice referendum in the weeks leading up to it. There were a lot of competing issues. Those things are out of our control sometimes, but obviously moving forward, timing is going to have to, be something that's seriously considered when calling a referendum. Having the time to go out to community, to educate Australians, to have meaningful conversations. People rocked up to the booth on the day and voted for something they had really not a extensive, education or understanding about. And that's no criticism of them. It's a criticism of the referendum and the way it was held. We also know that Australians don't like politicians, and we're seeing more and more of that as young people as well. And so, of course, as we saw it becoming a political or government-led thing, and everyday Australians didn't trust politicians and the message that they were putting forward. So there were a few other things as well that we've been looking at and what we can do better next time.
For sure. I also did want to flag, we've got some more pre-prepared questions, but the theme is conversations that matter. So we really want you to have your chance to be a part of this conversation and ask any questions you might have. You'll see the QR code on the screen. If you scan that, you'll be able to add any questions you want, be able to upvote questions, and this should work for people online as well. So if you have any burning questions, please feel free to add them there. But I'll continue with my questions. Post-referendum, we've seen the federal government walk back its commitment to the Uluru Statement and instead shift its focus to an economic empowerment agenda. This comes at a time where closing the gap statistics remain largely unchanged, and some targets are even going backwards. Can you both comment on this and the current state of play in Aboriginal affairs? Bridget, I might chuck to you first.
Yeah. I think one of the first things that happened after the referendum was a Productivity Commission report was released into closing the gap. And it just kind of proved everything that we were saying right through the campaign and leading up to it, that we need to do something different, and it needs to be structural, and you need to bring First Nations people to the table. We've now got 20 years this year actually, of closing the gap. And I don't think it's a surprise to anyone in the room when I say that things are remaining the same, and in fact some targets are going backwards, which is absolutely disgusting in this country in this day and age. When we have money being put in places that don't reach our communities, that don't service our communities in the right way, because our communities continue to be powerless and voiceless, on the matters that affect them. So really it comes back to the structural nature of this reform for the voice and for it to be guaranteed in the Constitution. That's just one example, but I think if we're talking about economic empowerment, this has been something that has been Indigenous policy for 30 years now. And, when I listen to some of the senior members of our team and who have really lived through, things like ATSIC and then the, empowerment, economic empowerment agenda, these things have been done before. It is status quo. And unless you change the structural setup of this nation, we're just going to be seeing the same thing over and over again. I'm not saying economic empowerment is a bad thing, but I'm critical of it if you don't have the structures in place to ensure that our mob are able to be a part of it and meaningfully participate in our democracy in a way that we deserve to.
I feel like we've said this before, especially even during the referendum campaign and even pre-referendum campaign. You know, Closing the Gap is status quo. It is managed by peak bodies who are funded by government, and we need community leaders at the table. We need community to stand up and have that, or be able to have that voice and that say on the matters that affect them. So I think it's super important to understand that, you know, obviously the result was the way it was, but, you know, we're hoping that, you know, our senior leadership, but also us as the younger generation can push this change. You know, this is what we're here for too. We're standing on the shoulders of giants, and we need to acknowledge that and recognise that, but we also need to push really hard for this change, because we're sick of living in the status quo. You know, we're sick of our children dying young, we're sick of our elders dying. We have so much sorry business that goes on in our communities now. It's awful, but, you know, we need to make change. And that's what we're doing here. We're having this conversation. So please ask any questions. No question is a silly question. So yeah, that's what we're here for.
Can I just add one thing to that as well? You just reminded me, like, I think one of the biggest things that we've seen is like laws around youth and criminal justice since the referendum. And I know that Professor Davis and Professor Hannah McGlade have written a complaint on this to the United Nations Human Rights Council. Like, this is one of the most pressing issues of our time, and if we had a voice, it would have made a huge difference. So when things are happening, when, you know, gendered violence is happening and there's not one Aboriginal woman at the table being consulted on the expert group that the government puts together, this is when the voice would have stood up. You know, like, I think people were talking about how it was toothless, and then we see things like happening in Victoria at the moment with the treaty negotiation process down there, where it's been successful because they've set up a Voice First, a really effective representative body to negotiate. And when we're looking at the treaty and the bill, it's guaranteed say for Aboriginal people in Victoria to be at the table when significant decisions are being made that affect Aboriginal people's lives in Victoria. So I think I'd really encourage people to look at things happening in our day-to-day lives where the voice would have made a difference, because throughout the campaign people were saying, like, genuinely asking, how will the voice make a difference? Well, it makes a difference in these spaces that affect our communities, like, disproportionately. And, you know, they are our people, they're our communities, they're our families. And, you know, it's now looking back on it, you just think, this is what we were trying to tell you. But I think moving forward, it's just such a clear case of why this is still needed. It doesn't go away because of the no vote. And what we've seen since the referendum, and, you know, the various events that have happened and the continuation of injustice is very telling of why we have to continue this moving forward.
For sure. This is my last question before we get to some fantastic questions from the audience. I think you outlined really well post-referendum how many issues we're seeing that we know the voice could have made a difference. Can you touch on the work we're doing to keep the campaign for voice, for structural reform and for ConRec alive, and the potential you see in the future to implement the Uluru Statement from the Heart's reforms like voice and like Makarrata?
So we do have 6.2 million friends that voted yes. Obviously, unfortunately, it was a 60-40 vote, but maybe I'm being very optimistic or naive here, but I think we can definitely get that 20% over the line. I think a lot of people heard the disinformation and the lies within the campaign, and as Bridget said, and as we've all said right now, is that education piece and bringing Australians along on the journey. So yeah, we're still, you know, selling our merchandise. People say the Uluru Statement from the Heart is dead. It is not dead. We are here, we're still doing the work. We're still fighting for structural reform and substantial change, because we need it. And as you've heard here today, we're disproportionately affected by the policies and laws that affect us, and we don't even have a say in it. Moving forward, we've still done a lot of community events. So we work close with this group called Mob 23, who are a South East Queensland group, actually led by my mum, and some of the Logan community yes groups. Bridie was on a panel not too long ago after Geneva, so she was kind of jet lagged, but she still did the panel. She still got up there, spoke about what we did in Geneva at the United Nations, and we're still doing a lot of community events. We're obviously doing Diversity Fest, so I think we're just continuing that research, continuing looking into why the result was the way it was, and where we go to from here. But it's a lot of reading. If you know Prof loves reading. We're getting there. We're definitely seeing, I guess, the light at the end of the tunnel. It's a very dim light, but it's there, and we'll just keep going.
Yeah, I think we're actually approaching the 2-year anniversary of the referendum, which is a bit crazy. I think we're about 2 weeks out, are we? 3 weeks out.
Oh, yes.
From the second anniversary of the referendum, which feels a bit surreal. I think after the referendum, we felt like we needed to pick ourselves up and keep going, and Prof would get us all on a call and say, where are we, what are we reading, what are we doing? But we have taken the time, and we had to go through a grieving process, and it did feel like we lost a lot and had to go through those stages of grief. But I think it was necessary as well, because we learnt so much through that, and I'm just so excited to bring all of that, all the experiences through the referendum, as well as all the research and analysis that the Uluru Dialogues team is doing, and go back out to our communities, go back out to First Nations and non-Indigenous Australia to just have these conversations. I think, thank you. And I think still to this day, the most energising thing is when we do events on the ground in community. And that's where our work is grounded. Yes, we're based at a university, and we're, super lucky to have all these resources to do the work here, the intellectual work, but the magic really happens when we go and do it on the ground, and you have community talking, people of all persuasions, all lived experiences and backgrounds, and coming with, an open mind and just wanting to have a genuine conversation. So, it has taken some time to get to that point, as Alira said, to see the light at the end of the tunnel. And we seriously were asking ourselves the question of, do we continue this after the referendum? And then it got to a point where we're yes, of course we're continuing this. And then we got to travel a little bit and engage with other, Indigenous peoples from around the world, and that helped bring a lot of perspective to everything, and that we are on the right path. And I think as young people, sometimes we might doubt ourselves as well, and we've always had the strong leadership women leaders behind us saying, drive this forward, it's your time to step up. And just excited to go back out to community and talk to everyone, and do, roll our sleeves up again and do the hard work that needs to be done, because I think, whilst all the flashy stuff happens and the campaign happens, it's actually the work that's done quietly and behind the scenes that is the most impactful to get us to that moment. And I feel just really grateful to be able to contribute to the space. And I know that it is a challenging space at the moment, because a lot of people in different sectors have moved on. But I'm really hopeful that we'll continue to have the conversations, and that the time will come where the country is ready to go to a referendum again.
I just want to mention too, we do have a podcast as well. It's called High Society, where we spoke about Reflections on the Voice, January 26, misinformation and disinformation. And we also, had a Reflections on The Voice held in Brisbane, not the Mob 23 one. This was probably I think later last year. So yeah, there's platforms and opportunities and presentations that we've done to, I guess, mourn and grieve, but also let people know that yes, we are, a bit silent, but we are still here. And, always check out our socials for our events that we are holding around the country. And yeah, Prof has Substack. We all have Substack. So if you don't have Substack, get on there, because we're always writing stuff. And whenever something comes out about Indigenous affairs, we're always on it. So yeah, just keep that in mind and always keep posted on our socials, which is Uluru Statement on Instagram and Facebook and LinkedIn. So yeah, we're always doing stuff. So just thought I'd plug socials as a millennial.
So I'm going to move to some audience questions now, and feel free to keep sending them in. We do have a question that I really want to touch on because I think it relates a lot to what we've been doing internally as a team. Why do you think Australians were so vulnerable to some of the lies and misinformation that was prevalent during the campaign? Specifically, thinking of the divisive voice argument that a lot of the key actors in the No campaign ran. Do you want to touch briefly on our work around mis and disinformation and how that actually impacted the referendum?
Yes,
Either of you?
This is a big one. I think, first of all, just from a personal reflection, we were on the front line of the misinformation and the disinformation day in and day out. The team will attest to it that we couldn't call it that because people didn't know what that meant. We had to start calling it lies. But even then, through our polling and research that we did, people saw it as fact. And Emily in our team, who's just at the front here, she's probably more well-versed in able to speak about this than I am. But, I think what we found is facts don't matter, unfortunately, when it comes to moments like this and political moments. And we've seen this happen right around the world. Our referendum in Australia was not the only thing that has been affected by misinformation and disinformation. It is very prevalent at the moment. Misinformation and disinformation has always been around, but we weren't prepared for the amount of it or the significant effect that it was going to have on the voice referendum itself. And that was due to timing around and what's happening around the world at the moment. But it did have an impact on the result. We've looked into, the psychology around it, I guess. I don't know if you can call it that. And, the more times a line is repeated, it's seen as fact. It can also be due to, someone having certain views and then that being used as permission to say, well, that view is okay. So that's a few things that I would have to say.
Yeah, I mean, for example, I think in my area, I'm in Ford or Logan, and yeah, there was a repetitiveness of all the No campaign that kept, I think, Australians were vulnerable to that, and they just kept seeing, most Australians, not all, because some did vote yes. So I think there would always be 5 No campaign call flutes, and then there's one yes campaign call flute. So it was a bit sad to see that, and always having to kind of, us putting our energy into the appropriate people who were, really willing to open their mind and listen to us and understand what we were trying to say, was helpful. But then there was I guess we knew that there was a 10% of people who were just blatantly going to vote no. So we didn't always try to, put our time into that. We try to put our time into people who were willing to listen to us and understand. But yeah, definitely the repetitiveness, and it was unfortunate, the 2 Aboriginal politicians that were on the No side were politicians, and Australians, I guess some Australians couldn't see that because, they align with their party, they don't align with their people. So it was unfortunate, but we just really had to combat it, and I don't think we didn't know how to do that per se, but even on social media too, it was just everywhere. A lot of the lies were everywhere. People said that it was just lawyers at the regional dialogues when that wasn't true, and all this information was on our Uluru Statement website, but unfortunately people just didn't want to listen or hear that. And even on polling day, we were in Logan, and this guy walked past and he's like, yeah, I'm just going to do a donkey vote. And we're like, no, vote yes. And just like trying to, tell the facts. But yeah, people just didn't want to hear it as well. So, yeah.
I think regulation as well plays a part in it. There was discussion around it during the referendum, and unfortunately, we didn't get that protection that was needed in, truth in political advertising. And so I think what we saw post-referendum is the government moved quite quickly to try and implement some regulations around that, which we didn't have during the referendum, which I'm not saying it would have fixed everything. It is there. Social media is quite unregulated. It uses particular algorithms that push forward particular messaging, especially ones that content that receives lots of reaction, which is usually very emotionally high, controversial content, and we saw that right throughout the campaign. So there's a lot to unpack there, and moving forward, I think it's really important that we move to some kind of reform or regulation around misinformation and disinformation, because I think at the end of the day, what Australians should be concerned about is how that is impacting our democracy. Because if people aren't being able to make an informed vote on something so important, like a referendum, we really need to question what's happening in that space.
For sure. Uluru, you touched on social media and the role that played in amplifying some of the dis and misinformation. But we've also seen social media be used as a tool for good, especially with the 6.2 million that voted yes, continuing the movement largely on social media, resharing positive things. And I think that comes back to the role, the 6.2 million people that voted yes, and UNSW and institutions like UNSW can play. I'm wondering if either of you have thoughts on the role of UNSW and similar institutions, and more broadly, the 6.2 million that voted yes in, continuing to push this movement along and working towards ultimately having a voice and having the reforms in the Uluru Statement implemented.
I think it's super significant, especially because, we have an AC here at the university, but we also have, many leaders who have fought so hard for, us to have a say. But I think post-referendum organisations and corporations and, community organisations there was still that support, and there was still that, fire in the belly. And there still is. People continuously want to email Emily, our comms person, constantly what are we doing next? What are we doing this? When are we doing this? So I think it's very significant. The conversation doesn't die here. It didn't die on October 14th. We're still here. We still need change. And I think people just need to stand up for what they believe in, and that's what happened throughout the referendum campaign. The NRL, AFL, big corporations, Woolies. So I think we really need people and big corporations to stand up, especially us being at UNSW. I think it's a privilege, and it's we're very grateful to be aligned with the UNSW values, but we need to be louder too. We need to talk more. We need to have keep having these conversations, and also just a plug, UNSW should keep pushing and supporting us more as well. Even giving us this platform to talk to, you guys today has been a privilege. So just keep the conversation going about structural reform and substantial change, because this is the only way forward, really. Not to say we don't, support what Victoria is doing right now with the treaty. I think it's, super proud, but we're still in the background having these conversations about structural reform.
Yeah, I think it is really important for institutions and, stakeholders right across the board. I think we did really feel that after the referendum, a lot of people stepped away from it because they thought the referendum was a one and done. But that is our work now, making sure that people understand that this is a long-term thing. The 67 referendum didn't happen overnight. There was years, decades that went into that to build up to that moment to make sure it was successful. Other groups advocating for other types of referendums aren't told to sit down and shut up. And I think, it has been interesting to see the different reaction, including by politicians that, you've had your turn now, let's move on to the next thing. It's really important that we push back on that kind of rhetoric and that attitude, because I can't say, I've said it a few times tonight, but this issue just doesn't go away. But unless Australians make it something that we're talking about and that we want dealt with, then it unfortunately will just keep being pushed to the sideline. And it's a long-term goal. It is a long-term goal, but we can't just move on to whatever's the next fashionable thing to do, which we have seen happen since the referendum, because it's, shiny and new. We have to stick to the mandate. We have to stick to what the goal is here if we want to see the outcomes. If we, don't want to keep talking about this in our lifetime and we want to leave a better legacy for our future generations, we need to deal with it. And that's actually going to require everyday people to keep having the conversations and pushing this forward to make it relevant.
I think acknowledging too, within the referendum year, or I think maybe a year before that, the voice wasn't on people's agendas, and we got that. Cost of living crisis was probably, I think, number one, and then I think the voice was number 3 or 5. So it was pretty kind of low down, but I think if we're continuing to have the conversations in the background, that helps us, and then when we're at the forefront, we get the win.
Yeah, I think you guys summarised it really well, and I reflect. I was 17 when I joined the Uluru Youth. I'm 22 now, and I know there were decades and decades of pushes for having a voice in decision making before the Uluru Statement from the Heart itself was even issued. So I think, as young people, we're really fortunate in that, although we did get our first big no with the referendum, we have, God willing, a fair few years left to continue to push for the statement. We are running out of time, so I did just want to ask you both briefly if you had any closing remarks, particularly if you have 1 or 2 actionable items people in this room or online could take to continue to support.
I think keep posted. We have a PVCS website, we have an Uluru Statement from the Heart website. We're still doing really cool things, and we're trying to make civics education cool and constitutional cool because it matters. Us being recognised and acknowledged in our country matters, and we will see that in our lifetime, and we really believe that. We want to stand for something strong, and we want to stand for something we believe in, and that's what we tell our Uluru Youth Dialogue as well. We keep fighting, we keep going. We know the concept of the voice isn't new. So, another plug at social media, follow Uluru Statement. And, look at our website. We always have something going on. So please keep the conversation going and tell people that the Uluru Statement from the Heart is not dead. We're here and we're still doing work.
I will also plug the website and sign up to our newsletter if you haven't already. I think that's just such an amazing resource where you can keep up to date with the work that we're doing, but also recommended reading, what's happening in the Indigenous affairs and policy space, our team's keeping on top of all of these things and trying to just keep everyone up to date and informed. Please reach out to us. Like, some of the highlights of our day is when Professor Davis sends through random emails from random people talking about how they want to help. So, if there's anything that you want to do, like, reach out to us, talk to us. I also just wanted to shout out to one of our Uluru Youth ambassadors in the room tonight, Jordan, as well. He was up the back at the merch stand, so if you want to have a yarn to him later, go and have a yarn. So Bridie and Jordan are two of our Uluru Youth Dialogue ambassadors who played a really significant role in New South Wales throughout the grassroots campaign on the ground in 2023. What else can I say? I think, we're still getting through a lot of the research and analysis, but there's big things to come. But I guess one message that I'd leave with everyone is, like, this can't be just about First Nations people. We don't want allies to just wait for us to tell you what to do. We want you to be active. We want you to get out there and don't be afraid to do things. I think sometimes people do worry that, they're stepping on toes or they're doing the wrong thing. But it's worse if you don't do anything. And, if you get growled once or twice by a community elder, you'll learn from it in good ways. And you'll know to do something differently next time. But we really need, our fellow Australians to step up here and continue to walk with us. At the end of the day, the Uluru Statement was about drawing that line in the sand, acknowledging the past, but most importantly, moving forward together. It was about love and belonging, and I think that's the message at the end of the day, and that's where we will find, our power as Australians to work together.
For sure. Well, I think we should leave the panel there. Yep. Thank you both for your time, and thank you everyone for attending. We do have a merch stand up the back, and we'll be there to answer any questions you have. But once again, thank you. And for those that are based at UNSW, the Diversity Fest runs all week, so check out the program for other events that are happening. But thank you.
No. Go Bridie.